Good morning again, friends. Make sure that you pay attention and listen carefully so you know exactly what to do today during your writing time independently. So, today we are going to talk about how we can use movement over time to help us in our writing piece. We have studied how to describe the where and when of a piece or the setting. A related but distinct element is how much time passes in a story and how it moves through the book. This is called movement over time. And today we're going to think about how we will move time in our writing. So let's go back to a story that hopefully you remember called An Angel for Solomon's Singer. When Cynthia wrote this story, she used the time frame as an overview of Solomon's life. And she did that by creating the scenes of old age in New York City and childhood in Indiana. So she started with that background of his life in general, an overview. And then she decided to write about one evening. The scene was the Westway Cafe, finding it, his first meal, and Angel's kindness. And then she continues to write over many, many nights. He had many, many visits to the cafe, and it relates to his memories back in Indiana. And then she tells us how it's every night for a year, dining at the Westway Cafe. And then again, she ends the story with an overview of Solomon's life again. And she shows that by changing, and he's happier in his old age in New York City. So the movement over time from the beginning of the end of the story was basically a year. And in that time, there was also those flashbacks to his earlier life. So this is how Cynthia does this in this story. And if you'd like to read this story again, remember, you can go back and click on it from our initial Cynthia Rylant author study. And there's a link to the YouTube there. Right? So we've studied how to describe the setting. And I want you to think about other ways how Cynthia Rylant in her stories moves time. We've talked about this when we read some of her other stories like A Night in the Country. The overall setting is the night in the country. But when we think about movement through time and really look at the illustrations, we see that it begins at night as people sleep and it ends at dawn. This is the movement over time. Cynthia uses the passing of the night to day to show us the length of the story. I think I have a bug in my throat. Okay. In Scarecrow, that we just read earlier today, time moves through a year in the Scarecrow's garden. The book begins in the spring, and the garden is tilled, and then seeds are planted and sprouted. Plants begin to yield flowers and fruit in the summer, and then they harvest in the fall, and winter brings the snow. So that's another example of her sequence of events unfolding naturally. And we've talked about how Cynthia Rylant's really good at using nature to help set the scene of her stories. So I want you to think carefully about your story. When will it begin and end? Imagine which framework of movement over time your new entry might use. Could your piece begin on an afternoon and end in the evening? Or is it better framed with a longer period of time? Or was it just minutes? And how are you going to show your reader? Right? So today we're going to take a look at this chart. It says movement over time, and it's asking us as the writer to use this organizer and the questions below to plan when your story will begin and when it will end. What will the time intervals and scene changes be, and how will you move time along? When I think about the time period, when we got an adopted Sophie, it was about a week's worth of time because we went on one weekend to look for dogs, And after we felt devastated because we thought we were going to lose her and not be able to get her, it was about another week until we went back and found out that she was up for adoption again. I remember it being the springtime, so I'm going to say here there's a weekend in the spring, and I could set the stage and the scene for that by talking about the weather. It was beautiful weather. I clearly remember that because we actually did get to take her outside a little bit and play with her. Fresh flowers were growing. Maybe I could add the way we were dressed in jeans and t-shirts. It wasn't too cool, it wasn't too hot. Okay, so somehow I'm going to add some of that description in to set that scene in the very beginning of my story. And then, so this is kind of tricky because I need to make it, I'm going to talk about that first part of the story. So this is going into the shelter. And how will I set the scene for that? Maybe I can talk about how it was daytime. And this was just a short amount of time. So, I might need to come back to this part as I continue to think. And then next, it was about a week long before we went back to the shelter. So I'm wondering how I'm going to set the scene for that. How am I going to describe to my readers that it wasn't until the following weekend? So maybe I could do that by maybe talking about how I was thinking about Sophie all week, but I knew we wanted to go back to find another dog. So I can kind of describe how I was feeling throughout the week, upset because I didn't think we were going to be able to get her, but we still knew that feeling that we wanted to go back because we really had been looking for a while. We wanted to be able to get her, but knowing that we couldn't, or we didn't think we could at the time, we wanted to be able to go back to the shelter and look again because each weekend there was new dogs. So maybe I can add that as part of my notes. New dogs would come each week. So we tried to go on the weekends when we weren't working. And then I think I'm actually going to skip this part because I don't think I really have another after that. I think I'm going to go right to my ending. So when will I end is that Saturday when we found out we could adopt Sophie. And I think I can set the scene again by talking about it was another beautiful spring day. And I think this was actually the day that we got to take her outside to get to know her. There was like a little gated in area that we could take her to get to know her, see if she liked us and that sort of thing. So I bet I could probably add a little bit more to that. My movement over time from beginning to end, this is where we have to think about in total how long was that time frame. So this is where I'm going to say a week. So I really have to consider and continue to jot down and think about how am I going to set the scene for each of these things happening. And just like Mrs. Bauer did, if you don't need each of these different parts, you can go in and delete it. You don't need it. But you can't be deleting all of them. So you have to think about when will it begin, then, next, when will I end? At least that much, because we really want to develop the story, create this time frame. And really, I could go back in there and probably add more. So maybe I do want to keep that in there and see if I can think of what did happen after that. What am I forgetting? What am I missing? And this is where I might just need to take time to continue talking to other people, like my husband, who was there with me, or just taking time to myself to think about my story and how I really want to stretch it. Okay? So what I want you to do is go ahead into Schoology. You're going to get your own slide that looks just like Mrs. Bowers, and I want you to see if you can add some of these same things. Remember, I can post again the different stories if you want to go back and refer to Cynthia Ryland's work as well. Let me know if you need help.